welcome, Christopher. I'm now here. My name is Lars Münter of the Danish Committee for Health Education, and I'm here with Christopher Evatt as part of our expert feedback series in the Pockets of the Future campaign we are holding this week in the Nordic Health 2030 movement. And well, today is November 3rd, Christopher, which would sort of be a date not to remember if it wasn't for the US presidential election that seems to focus a lot of media attention around the globe for various reasons. But that sort of we'll probably talk a little bit, not too much, I hope, about that, but about definitely choices we make and the future that comes from that. So a sort of a starting question is, how do you see the future of health and well-being, and allow us then to be Eurocentric in this case? Is it bright and shiny or dark and gloomy?
I tend by nature to focus on what's bright and shiny, Lars. What I see now is an awakening, an increase in awareness that health and well-being are part of a whole system's understanding. So what I'm saying is that our physical health is dependent upon what's going on in the extended environment around us, whether it be in our family relationships or community, our work relationships, how we think, how we feel, and of course our physical activities. So there's this awakening now to this understanding that it's not just something that's isolated by itself, and it's all-encompassing. So now with COVID, of course, there's been an inner focus of going within. And one of the good things I've noticed in our own village here as I go out is to see many more couples walking hand in hand. So it indicates that the relationships, the healthy relationships, are being fostered by this coming together that COVID has brought about. So that's a minor, an indication of what's happening with our health. And I think this conference, by bringing together all the Nordic countries, is a wonderful example of our collective wish to see us all be healthy. And of course, that links into the well-being economy, which is my main area of focus, to see all being well and how every part of the society impacts every other part of the society and also the natural environment. Yeah. So I'm an optimist. Yeah.
Well, well, looking then, of course, in such an experience of people holding hands, do you think then that the experience of 2020, if you will, has not just moderately increased your optimism, or are these signs of people holding hands, is that merely a sort of a more visible way of seeing things that were actually already there, or is it a shift, you think?
Yeah, I think it's a shift. I haven't seen so many hands being held as I've seen in the last few months. So it's a small indication. It's just simply an indication for me that people really enjoy each other's company and value that. So as we see the turmoil going on in the world, I think it forces us to come back to what's really important. And what's really important is the quality of the relationships that we have with those we love. And that's primarily family and friends, and then the extended community around us. So I see this as a major shift that's occurred particularly with this COVID crisis.
Well, I know that that you work with. So I mean, I'm making you sound a little bit like you're a couples therapist. I mean, your work is not focused on people holding hands. That's sort of my point, I guess. Sorry, Christopher, but in a wider sense, then, is that sort of also a feeling that you can see? I mean, it's not the feeling that you get perhaps from watching Donald Trump, particularly of holding hands, but in general, is this feeling of connectedness? How do you see that also translate into, let's say, institutional or organizational structures? Is that sort of something you can see there?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I see with the Wellbeing Alliance, the We All Alliance, which today I'm speaking on behalf of, and I'm a member of it. It's a wonderful indication of what's going on around the globe now, of people and organizations and movements in all countries coming together, and governments in different countries coming together to co-create well-being on the planet for people and the natural environment. And it's so encouraging to see this, because we have all the individuals and all the NGOs, and there's literally hundreds of thousands of these organizations, all working for our good in one sense or other. And now they're coming together, if you like, globally, to hold hands to support each other, so that we have this vast network of support that we can call on. So if I'm in Porvoo here in Finland, or in the south of New Zealand, I can call on huge resources to help me in my cause to hopefully create a better world, or create businesses that add to the flourishing of the planet, or whatever it happens to be. And this is a wonderful phenomenon that you probably won't hear about on TV, or on national radio, or on the multimedia, on social media. But it's there, and it's happening.
You actually you sent me a PDF that you wanted to show me. Is that right? Was that sort of?
If you like, there's a slide I sent you called "Vision: A Well-Being Economy."
Let me just so you can talk me through that one.
Yeah, it's the first one. Yeah, that's the one. Yeah,
it's on your screen too. I'll just zoom in a little.
On my screen. Yeah. It's small, but getting bigger.
Yes, small and getting bigger.
This is
a reasonable way of telling a story about the Wellbeing Economy Alliance as well.
Yep. So what we've got here, just talking about the whole phenomenon of connecting hands around the globe, is we have this organization which is basically volunteers, supported largely by donations, but mainly people giving their time and free of charge, comprising, I think, of about 500 NGOs and movements, and about almost 2,000 people now, and it's rapidly growing, to provide a network where we can, first of all, have this connection that's on the left-hand side, both globally and also locally, so that we have the support there to take us forward, to give us the resources and the encouragement and the research and the case studies that we need to be able to make our difference. And then in the middle here, we have nature. First and foremost, of course, without nature on the planet, none of us could be here. We wouldn't have a society, and we certainly wouldn't have an economy. So it's the recognition that nature indeed is our mother support for all of life on planet. And also we need it for our health. I mean, it's well shown that our connection with nature immediately improves our mental health, for example. And the UK National Health Service happened to say last year that being in nature is very good for our health, apart from other things about connecting to each other and those we love. Participation. Again, we want to participate. We want to be active in our work. We want to make a difference in our lives. We want to make a difference in our communities. So everything that impacts us, we want to participate in so that we can make a contribution to the whole. So we in turn receive the benefit of that, and so does everybody else. So participation is something that I see is starting to happen, particularly in companies that we've researched, of how the companies and the people within those organizations do extremely better in every way if the people are fully involved emotionally, inspirationally, with what they're doing, and it has meaning. And then we have the whole aspect of fairness, of how we can all do well and how we can treat ourselves justly, and so that we can share equally or share fairly our inputs. So often we see investment of inputs being only in money terms, but what we're talking about here and looking at is the investment of our expertise, our knowledge, our time, our care. All of these are investments that contribute to the greater whole, and what we want to see is a fairness of distribution of the benefits that are created by our collective inputs. And finally, dignity. And of course, that is treating one another with respect for our differences, and to celebrate our differences and our unique strengths, and to treat each other with injustice and all these qualities that I've just talked about, so that we can live lives of meaning, that we can live in reasonable comfort of whatever we need, so that we have overall a well-being around the whole planet, not just in a few nations. And I know that New Zealand is in many ways leading the way to become a leading nation in well-being, and our government has just been re-elected again for the second time for another 3 years to see their agenda through. And so we're seeing this happen with countries, with companies, with communities, and all we're doing here with the well-being, or we all organization, or the network, is to support this movement around the planet. And anybody can join. It's non-political, it's there for everybody, it's an international resource that we all add to and draw from. Yeah. So there we are, that's the well-being economy, the hope for the future.
Yeah, yeah. And as you say, open for everyone, I guess. A funny thing is, or it struck me while you were talking, well, a few things actually, and we'll dive into them because I can. Well, first of all, as you said, and that goes to what we're doing, I guess, in the Nordics as well, that your government has been now re-elected for a period of 3 years. How do you sort of balance the challenge of short-termism and well-being, especially? I mean, because you can't really, if you will, build a long-term well-being in 3-year periods. You have to do something differently, and then it's a challenge for most, I guess, Western democracies. How do we balance the political cycle with the environmental cycles?
Very good question there, Lars. And I really take that to heart, because in New Zealand we have this very short period, 36 months between one election and the next. So it's impossibly short. But what this government has done in its first term of office is to put in place an agenda that will carry on even if it went out of office, that the laws and the investments that have been pledged to be made in developing our economy and society are going to continue. Now, it's not to say another government could come in and change that, but this government has put that in place. And what is more, it's engaged the citizens and the thought leaders within New Zealand to help put together its agenda. So the people who have inputted it, irrespective of whether governments come into power or out of power, are still there, active within their own roles within the society. And they will be carrying on with those roles irrespective of what government is in power. Now, there's another force again, which is largely unrecorded in the media, and that is in New Zealand we have a population of 5 million. And I discovered the other day that we have 2 million people who are actively involved in volunteering to help the society, to help the environment. Now, that's absolutely phenomenal. So that ground movement of the people carries on, and they'll be doing what they are currently doing, that is to make a better New Zealand, irrespective of what government is in power. And that movement is growing, and the resources that are being put into place to support that movement are quite phenomenal. I mean, just to take a little example, I mean, a company or a firm of solicitors can log in to an app and say, okay, we've got some time free on Fridays between 3 and 5. Anyone who wants some legal help that they can't normally afford to pay for, we're available. So just click on the app and let us know, and we'll connect with you and help you the best way we can. So these sorts of support systems are being embedded in the society, not by government, but by the people themselves.
Interesting. Yeah. I guess I will admit that I was sort of fishing for a good response on that one, because of course that is something that we also need across the Nordics or across, well, Europe, the globe, on finding out how to structure that well, potential. Yesterday I talked with Cormac Russell. One of the elements there is, of course, in empowering communities, is that, of course, you're essentially empowering someone that doesn't have all the professional competencies of the system, and that sort of can sometimes be a challenge. Well, as Cormac said, that essentially, of course, you have amateurs on one side and professionals on the other one, and that is a imbalance that can be tricky to solve, to ensure that the volunteers well, stay motivated, I guess, because the large part of being a volunteer is, I guess, from your slide, the dignity part, being respected as an equal participant in the exchange of well-being in a way. But there's another point from your slide, the eco. When you have all of these investments, as you say, some of them are, of course, your example before of contributing a few hours. That is not necessarily a tangible asset, but sometimes your contribution can be even more intangible. And normally, when you talk about investments, you talk about something very tangible, meaning money. How do you see sort of the progression of managing different investment types, perhaps, in the well-being economy? Because the well-being economy is about much more than money, I suppose.
It is, absolutely. The well-being economy is really a reaction to economies that are just measured by GDP. And as we know, GDP is a very limited measure purely of the transactions, financial transactions happening within an economy or society. And as Robert Kennedy famously said, I think in the 1960s, it measures everything but what is meaningful to life, or what we would really value as people. And so we're now waking up to the realization that that we can have economic growth, but at the same time, what's happening throughout the world is a decline in the quality of life. And I'd just like you to bring up that other slide, Lars, headed up genuine progress flatteners, because it really makes a good point around this one.
2 seconds. I'll just move my kitty pictures out of the way also, and dogs.
Yep,
well.
that's
So.
Yeah, fantastic.
So I'll just click on the side. Yeah.
Yeah. So the point here is that the study goes from 1950 to 2000, but the lines on the graphs continue, and so the blue line is simply representing the world's GDP. That's the economic performance of companies, or of countries, sorry, and we can see it continuing to grow. And then we see the red line below that. We see an increase between 1950 up to about 1970, early 1970s, in life satisfaction. And after that, we see it leveling off and starting to decline. So that's what's been happening throughout the Western world, not only since 1970, but it's continuing today. And we see the effects of that, the decrease in the quality of our environment, the air, the water, the depletion of species, the loss of arable land through desertification, and so on. So we're seeing a decrease in the quality of life that we experience, although the GDP may be rising. So there's a disconnect here, a very serious one. And what the well-being economy is about is the focus on the red line of how do we increase together, how do we collaborate and work together across all sectors of society, government, business, NGOs, communities, family life, us all, to have a higher quality of life, as opposed to just having a GDP which is constantly rising because of more and more economic activity, which doesn't necessarily equate into greater life satisfaction. So this is what the aim of the well-being or the We All organization is all about. And it's very interesting to see Japan in context with this. Their GDP has not increased for the last 10 years, yet their quality of life, their life satisfaction has steadily increased. So we are seeing now the possibility, examples of whole nations being able to increase the quality of life without the necessity of having to make more and more investments into the economy to grow the economy, because growing the economy doesn't necessarily translate into growing the quality of life. So thank you for that slide, Lars.
You're welcome. I was reminded also of one thing that, an example from our own backyard in Denmark. One thing that we've been proud of for a number of years been the ability to grow the financial economy without necessarily growing our climate footprint. Of course, in part because of the massive investments in wind energy, but still being able to progress financially, if you will, without necessarily harming the environment. And I definitely like the idea of focusing the other way, because it's sort of my example is sort of the negative, doing more money without doing worse. I would prefer the other way around, I guess, basically. What would you point to then for the Japanese? What are the primary tools that they use to achieve that?
Well, that's a question I'm really not equipped to ask. I've not studied the Japanese model so much, but I am aware of the result of what they've done is to be able to improve their standard of living without necessarily having to increase their GDP. So I wish
For our viewers, I had not asked Christopher to read up on his expertise on Japanese modern economic policies. I was just curious, I guess. But it is fascinating. But when you look at the graph, I'm also struck by roughly around the time when you look at this graph. That is also the time where the Millennium Development Goals were set, which was hugely beneficial in many ways for at least for, well, not eradicating poverty, but at least doing some very good things to limit it. But what we can see perhaps is that even though we have done a lot, we've been unable to fully translate that windfall into well-being. So this graph is also sort of indirectly a graph of income inequality, sort of.
Yes, yeah, it's certainly causing that. And we experienced that in New Zealand. I mean, in 1984, New Zealand adopted a totally different economic policy than what it had been pursuing up until then. Up until then, it had pursued an agenda that was very, very similar to the Nordic countries, Denmark included, of course, where the focus was on the well-being of people. So it was a society that provided free education, free healthcare, of course, paid out taxpayers' money, and also housing for all. And then in 1984, we switched to an agenda where we'd place the economy first, on the mistaken belief that if the economy was thriving, there would be the so-called trickle-down effect of benefits to the rest of the society. And as we've seen, not only in New Zealand, but possibly in all developed countries, that didn't happen. So it was a mistaken understanding that the economy would be able to provide what we actually need as humans. So we've seen in New Zealand a massive decrease in the standard of living, even though our economy is probably still increasing at about 4% per annum. And that looks healthy. But as that graph showed, that doesn't necessarily equate to a quality of life. And we've now in the situation where this government is trying to address or redress the whole problem of having, I think, 200,000 young people who are in poverty, and some of them go to school without a breakfast. These are the downsides of pursuing economic growth and not taking care of the other things that we as humanity need. So it's as a whole, what is required, Lars, is a rethinking of why we're here on planet Earth, and what do we form and create institutions, whether they be government, business, or NGOs. What's the purpose of those human-created institutions? Why are they there, and how do they serve us? And this is the questioning now that's going on right around the world, saying, okay, what's this life all about? What are we here for? What do we co-create together? So this is the big rethink, a retake, if you like, that's happening. And I think the coronavirus has been like a full stop, bringing us up to a halt and giving us some time to reassess and recalibrate, hopefully for a better future.
Yeah, of course. But that's a different question that popped in my head right now. But essentially, though, given that we're talking on November 3rd, will really the U.S. election make a difference? I mean, would in sort of course, it will make a difference for some, but is it our choice sort of to continue the path that we would like, or is how would you see the sort of, is this a battle or simply more of a choice? Yeah.
I think your key word, Lars, is it's a very good word, is the word choice. We can each decide how we choose to respond to what's going on around us. And it's our choice. It's not made for us. We decide how whether we're going to respond in fear, or whether we're going to respond in love, or whether we are going to respond at all. But it's always our choice. And what I constantly in my work mentoring leaders is I really try to make it very clear for them that everything they do within their organizations and how they support their people and their clients and their suppliers and the environment is a choice. And we make it moment by moment. And no matter what happens in America, or anywhere else for that matter, or even in our neighborhood, it's our choice of how we respond. And whether we respond positively to make our difference, whether we see it as something that can catalyze us into bringing about a positive change in our relationships and our businesses and the world around us, or whether we retreat into ourselves because of the fear and the doubt and what have you, and become powerless. And certainly my life passion is to see everybody fully in their power, making the choices that add to the quality of their life and the lives of those around them. So you came up with absolutely the right word, choice, irrespective of what's going on in the external world.
This is then also then connected, I guess. I've been drawn to the idea or the concept of systems leadership. I mean, for those in this digital room that doesn't know the concept, it's this sort of the idea that leadership is more than simply the role or the task assigned for you, that it's also a choice of what you do within the system that you're in, and that you can make a change by well exercising leadership, regardless of whether you've been given that responsibility or not. When we look at cases like both the American states, after Donald Trump pulled out of the Paris Agreement, that the American states pledged that they would sort of pick up the mantle, or we see with WHO, with especially, I guess, at this point, European states pledging more money for the WHO, or for that matter, the C40 cities initiative. Is that then a series of cases also of systems leadership that we can see translated into regions, communities, people, organizations realizing that they have more power, I guess, than they think they do? And if you will, why then? Why now?
Well, I think one of the benefits of seeing dysfunction around us is to look within ourselves and say, okay, what can I do about this? What can I be responsible for? Which comes back to being the leader that you just mentioned, looking not just at our role, but our ability to be able to make a difference in the world that we are involved in. And so we see that, as you mentioned, with some of the states in America. We see that certainly in communities right around the planet. I think of what's happening in Scotland at the moment. They are again a well-being economy. Same with Wales, and in the case of Scotland, I was just reading yesterday about the village or the town of Linwood, where some of the people were unemployed. So the city itself got together to create organizations, in this case companies, which the citizens could own and become employed within those companies. So it's all a case of how do we help ourselves, how do we self-lead and help one another to collectively lead to create ideally the villages or the cities or the lives that we want around us, and whether it be states or countries like New Zealand or Bhutan or Wales or Scotland, it's up to us to front up and create the future we want.
Mm.
This is our time. I mean, the bell's ringing, and we're all called to action. Well, no matter who we are, we all have something to contribute.
Sort of the ability, perhaps also by social media to be inspired. I mean, there's definitely a dual quality, to put it in a friendly way, of the social media to do well, things for good and things for the not so good. But in this case of being inspired by other people doing good is also one of the qualities of it. Actually, though, you mentioned, of course, economy, but also we just were briefly at the echo of the ecosystem, and the challenge, I guess, of that, as you said, we can see a very positive benefit on our mental health when we are connected with nature. And at the same time, we have a huge biodiversity crisis at this stage. Is then sort of some of well, our loss of quality of life, is that sort of our soul, if you will, realizing that we are hurting Mother Nature and therefore we feel bad collectively? Or how can we sort of I mean, when I would like to make a change for well, the climate or nature, if you will, it is an uphill battle when I know or look at the coal industry. I am but a single citizen, and what can I do to maintain the balance of wanting to not just see, as you would see, that I'm more than a consumer. I'm also a part of that nature. I'm not just a producer or a employee or a part of a economic ecosystem. I'm also part of a natural ecosystem. Could you just dive into that one, because we haven't talked that much about, we talked a lot about economy, I guess, the echo of economy, but also of the ecosystem and the well-being there.
Well, of course, as I mentioned earlier on, just very briefly, life on the planet cannot exist. You know, we cannot exist as humans or have an economy or anything like that unless we have a healthy planet, and that's number one. But each of us can do something in our own right. And as I was coming to this interview this morning, I just happened to see at the bottom of the stairs a photograph of my son Alexander and my daughter Maria, and I just brought this with me simply because what I encouraged them to do were to buy 2 flowers and plant them on a bridge that comes from our village across the river. And on these edges of the bridge, there are these stone posts, and on top there are these metal flower pots that have been empty for many, many years. And I said, come on, children, let's make our difference to this bridge. Let's beautify it so it's lovely for all. So that's what we did that day. And so each of us can do something. And it's a bit like us all being in a boat together, and maybe we each hold a cup, and the boat is starting to fill with water. So as each of us take the cup in our hands and start to bail out the water goes overall, and the boat comes through more and more to the surface and rises up out of the sea so it can float properly. that's our individual responsibility to make a difference where we can, where we're located, in whatever way we can. And that's how we do it. And then share those stories with the wonderful connections we now have with internet, and using the platform of, say, we can collect our individual case studies of what we're doing, how we did it, to save others having to reinvent the wheel, so we can all make a difference much faster, because the world needs us fully now to be fully engaged to make our difference. And it goes back to your point before, that we are all leaders, and we all have the power of choice. And all I wish is for people to take that initiative that they have and make their positive action in whatever way they can, in their work, their lives, and in the world around them. And collectively, we make a difference. And that is the future of the planet. It's not reliant on a government or a political party or something like that. It's totally reliant upon us.
It strikes me also that when we talked about the graph before, that is a study of how things have progressed. But of course, we have no way of knowing how it could have progressed had we made different choices. But what we sort of did prove was that trickle down didn't work. But an interesting thing, I guess, from 2020, and maybe also from what you said just before, that we might be realizing that trickle up might work. Because when you focus, well, I mean, in 2020, if nothing else, it proves that failure to invest fully in prevention and health systems and the resilience of them is bad for your economy. So it's been shown, I guess, in a study in the UK as well, especially in the northern parts of England, that investments in health, investments in, I guess, nature as well, boosts the economy. Far from just taking money out of the equation, it adds to the overall economy. So the question, sort of interesting experiment, what would the graph that you showed have looked like if we had invested more in health and well-being? Would we have been even richer, if you will, than also in a economic terms from that? So would you ascribe to the idea or theory that well, we are depleting definitely our natural resources, but if we regenerated them, perhaps they would regenerate us as well?
Absolutely. That's a wonderful question, Lars, and I'm so happy you asked it. I'd like to answer it in several different ways. First of all, if we look at farming, I mean, New Zealand is a farming country. And I just was hearing recently about a research done with one farm in the South Island, where the farmer who's inherited the farm from his parents had worked in the city and knew nothing about farming, and his parents died and he took over the farm. He was about to go bankrupt, and then he decided, well, let's see how nature works. And so it was a cattle station or farm. And what he did was to simply put out in the paddock all different types of things like salt and charcoal and molasses and so on, which may or may not have a beneficial effect for the cows or the cattle. And he just found that they helped themselves to whatever they wanted. He then started to plant the farm with different crops, so that the soil could regenerate. And within about 5 years, I think, he only needs to farm 1/3 of the area, and it's now 3 times more productive than it ever was when he was farming the whole area. So this was simply by investing back into nature, and particularly developing the topsoil, the humus in the soil, which, by the way, can hold up to 50, can be 50% carbon. So the soil is a massive intaker and sequester of CO2. But that's another issue. But that's what he did. So that's one case of looking after, investing back into the health, in this case of the land. Then I think of Denmark in particular. If we go back to the history of Denmark in the early 1980s, not 1980s, 1880s, all the Nordic countries, including Denmark, were in abject poverty, and how the intellectuals or the thinkers of that time from Denmark, they said, okay, we need to develop our people. And even though they're poor, they're working on the land, they may not be as educated as they could well be, what we will do is develop our people in a human sense, not just in reading, writing, and arithmetic, but as people. And they set up, as you probably know, these folk schools. And in the folk schools, young people from the age of 18 to 30 would be living there for up to 6 months. They would learn to go to the library and do research. They'd learn expression skills to how to put forward their ideas. And this movement, which came from Denmark, spread right throughout the Nordic countries, Norway, Sweden, Finland. We have one of these schools in Finland, which was established in 1893 in our village. And this was a wonderful way of thinking people, in this case, who were conscious of how do we invest the best of ourselves in the next generation of leaders. And as a consequence, we have a wonderful quality of life here in the Nordics that's the envy of the world. And we did it collectively, or you did it, the Nordic countries did it, with just people, and developing those people who in turn developed such wonderful societies that we see today. And this was all focused on putting back into the society what we can do. And one of my passions and my callings is to bring together the generations, the generation that has the wisdom and the resources with the younger generations who are going to be the leaders of the future, and how we can work with our children, and I work with Alexander, of how we can bring these two generations together to create the futures that we want to see, just in the same way the Nordic countries did so long ago. So these are just two examples. And the third example I love to share, because my background is as an entrepreneur setting up businesses and social enterprises, is what we're seeing now are organizations that are looking at it, as you use the word, a whole systems point of view, and not just seeing their organization in isolation as a profit-making machine, but as a unit there that's working with a network around them of planet, people, suppliers, customers, the society they're operating in, and see the big picture and saying, okay, how can we be, as an organization, a catalyst in this big network so we can be a force for good? And that is absolutely central to my work here in Europe, or Northern Europe, is working with leaders so that they can gain their own consciousness about that, tap into their own wisdom and deep understandings, so that they can develop the people within the organization, and then the organization itself can make its positive difference in the bigger world. So those are just three examples that come to mind: the farming, investing back in nature, Denmark, that instigated the whole movement towards investing in people and their development, and then the third one, which is all about developing our organizations to be forces for good, internally and externally.
Is that then in practical terms the B Corps that you refer to? B Corps
definitely be part of it. They're certainly on that track, yeah.
Yeah. Well, interesting. Of course, to those of you listening, I have not paid Christopher money to praise the Nordic countries, but it's of course nice that you mentioned. It's a wonderful example also, because well, to those that know Scandinavian history, that was so very true, what Christopher said. The Nordics were definitely not affluent in the 1880s. Indeed, I have a house in Sweden, in Småland, and that's even though it's not a story that's well known as the Irish famine. It had more or less some of the same role, that people were living in poor squalor, and about well, as for half, 25% of the population, certainly everyone below the age of 50 that could walk, well, they traveled to America instead. So when I see the beauty of Sweden and the red houses, I'm looking at the aftermath of a sort of a population disaster. In some ways, you can say the same for Ireland. We like the Green Island, but it is still sort of haven't really relapsed from the disaster that struck them during the potato famine. But also the positive side of that story is, of course, that from the 1880s till the 1980s, if you will, is in human terms, that's not very long. You can produce massive changes within a very short time frame by choosing differently. And is that then one of the first questions I asked you was the question of short-termism and long-termism. Will we be better perhaps in the coming years to make those better choices, because we have not just historical data, I guess, but also other types of data that will make us bolder, braver, able to, I mean, I can't see it on my paycheck tomorrow, but I can see it in the paycheck of my grandchildren, if you will. Is that something that either by exporting, if you will, the folkskole, as you mentioned, to even more countries, that we will see in the coming years, or is it more localized?
Well, we have two phenomena. We've got a global phenomenon, which means that the globe has now become like a village because of the internet. But the action takes place locally, and we don't necessarily have to go deep into history to look for examples of how we can create a well-being planet in the fullest sense of the word. The examples are actually all around us. They are already in our companies, and you mentioned the whole movement of B Corps, that's business for good. There's about 3,000 of them now, and rising all the time around the planet, who are all working for the good of the environment and people. So the cases are there. So and you won't hear about them on television, unfortunately, but they are there. And the purpose of We All, as a network, is to provide a platform where people can share their experiences of what's working to create a well-being world, whether it's certainly locally, but also this spreads collectively. So that's the key. And within companies, we see the whole rise of what we call conscious leadership. And we sort of go back to the topic that you raised earlier about each of us being a conscious leader, making conscious choices. And that simply means waking up to what's around us and being aware. So with this, with this conference that you're having, it is all about making us aware of the need to be caring for our health as opposed to just looking after our sickness. So that's a wonderful example that this conference is involved in. but it's about sharing what works with others. And we do this locally because that's where we can act. And collectively, we share our experiences so we can all learn from each other to make the changes that we want to see. And in companies, this is what's happening. Those companies that are doing really well, and I mean businesses, are the ones that care most for all their stakeholders and work for the benefit of all their stakeholders. And what happens last is their stakeholders start working for them so that they can do well. So it becomes a lovely dance of creating good together. And so those companies will be the ones that will survive and thrive, and those organizations that are only there for their own good, simply they won't be supported. People will consciously be giving their votes in terms of their money to those organizations that supply goods and services that are good for the planet. And that's what's happening now.
Well, you've mentioned it a few times, but your mother country of New Zealand is not where you live now. You've traveled quite far, actually, to the other end of the world, Finland, coming from one remote location to another remote location, some might say, but still. Having had that travel, what would you? I mean, aside from living in a wonderful village, you are active, working for the well-being of the world. What are some of the things that you're doing in sort of, I mean, hoping, I guess, to see? I know that, of course, the Finnish government is working with a well-being concept quite a lot as well. But what are some of the things that you would like to see in the coming years in Finland or in the Nordics to improve the well-being alliance, aside from, well, doing good, if you will?
Well, I think ultimately it's all about doing good. If we're not doing good, what are we doing? You know, that becomes the question. I'm very blessed to have married a lovely lady from Finland, so that is responsible for me being here, and our children have been blessed with having being educated here as well. So we're very fortunate to have a leg in both parts of the world, New Zealand and here in Scandinavia. So your question was, what's needed now in Scandinavia in particular, or Finland? Again,
your key hopes, perhaps, either following 2020 or, yeah.
My key thoughts around that is, again, it comes back to self-leadership. It's self-responsibility. It's care for the self, and each person caring for the others who are around them. So it's moving from a prime focus of state care for the people, which has been absolutely incredibly, amazingly good in terms of the benefits that it's created, particularly here in Finland, to not letting that go, but now society, individually and collectively, for each of us to take a responsibility and a self-leadership role in making our difference, whether it be in the workplace, in our families or communities. And that is the movement that is now needed. If you like, the state has been our father or mother figure. Now we need to grow up as individuals and start to take on our adulthood of being fully responsible for ourselves and the people around us and the environment.
Yeah, there's some definitely I was a part, of course, of the process that built the model for the self-care, the balance between healthcare and self-care in the Nordic Health 2030 model. Given that this is a continuous, ecosystem, really, between self and system, continuously So I would fully agree, and again, even all evidence points to the contrary. Christopher and I simply share a mutual set of values, nothing more, it seems. That's great. But I think actually, for the benefit of well, people that are present at this stage have, of course, found this interview via the Nordic Health 2030 website or media. But if people want to see some more about the Wellbeing Alliance as well, and haven't sort of discovered that Google would probably help you, I guess that it could also be helpful just to show the third slide, Christopher, that you shared with me. 2 seconds, I'll dig it out, because of course that's also quite helpful to allow people to find you, I suppose. 2 seconds.
I'd be more than happy for people to contact me, and they can do that via my website, or they can email me, or even phone me. And there's my email address, my phone number, and my website that reaches me personally. And there is a contact form on the website. Just simply fill in what you're interested in, what your question is, and I'll be delighted to get back to you, because we're all here working together, each of us in our own way, to make our difference in our lives and in the world around us. So that's why I'm here.
And you've also managed to find an iconically, amazingly iconically Finnish picture with lakes in the background and a birch tree in the side.
Yes, well, that's not far from our village, on a lovely summer day here in Finland on the archipelago. Yeah.
Well, Christopher, it's been a pleasure talking to you. Of course, since it's an area that we both feel passionately about, we could continue for hours on the topic. But I hope that we've at least well, spread some joy, some hope, some inspiration during this talk, and I'm very look forward to continued conversation on that matter. I know that people can join the Wellbeing Alliance, people can join the Nordic Health 2030 movement as well, and I hope that people will exercise system leadership and do so in the coming days and years. Thank you very much, Christopher.
Lars, I'd like to thank you too, and I loved your questions, and it's been a great pleasure to be here, and I'm more than happy to support anybody who would like help to take these matters we've discussed forward and to make their difference in the world. So thank you, Lars. It's been really good.
Thank you. See you.
Bye.